Hello, welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I am Brandon Testers. I'm a licensed therapist, but this is definitely not therapy for many, many, many reasons. What it is just a conversation. I'm here. I have the information I have and the time that I have and the abilities that I have. You're here and you have the time and the information and the abilities that you have, and we're just going to combine them as much as we can for the next, hour or so, to whatever purpose we can. I run a therapy and executive functioning coaching practice called Effective Artistry. That's our logo up there in the corner. We're located in the North Shore suburbs. Our office, anyway, is located in Northbrook, Illinois. But coaching happens primarily online. We work with people all over the world. Yeah, thank you for being here. I've been giving this spiel a lot lately, but I'm going to do it again. If you're here and you feel comfortable getting into the chat, please do, because then I don't have to just make my guesses about who you are and what you might want, which I'm already doing, right? I wouldn't do or say any of the things that I'm doing or saying if I didn't have an imagination, accurate or not, that there are people watching this and that those people might be thinking this or looking for that or whatever, right? That's how communication works. We make guesses about how what we do and what we say is going to be interpreted. But if you're here and you're in the chat and you can actually talk to me, I can see what you're saying instead of just making my guesses and predictions, then you have a lot more control over how this thing goes. So I'm going to say stuff that you're going to attend to, observe in whatever way, and theoretically will impact you. And you're going to say stuff that impacts me, and we'll go where we go. I always pick a topic. I say always. Every time I say I always pick a topic, but really I only pick a topic in advance, maybe like half the time. This time I did a whopping 30 seconds before we got on the call on the stream. We're going to talk about productivity, getting things done, what that kind of stuff means, and how to do it. And I'll try and be practical again, but that is a lot easier for me when I have specific practical questions, that I know matter. Otherwise, it's weird. It's harder for me to say things like, okay, define a certain area of your house as the productive area. And you only go, if I'm worried that, okay, well, not everybody has a house not everybody has a living situation where they've got a separate space, even a corner to dedicate to something like this. So I don't want to throw out suggestions like that. And of course, that's a lot just my own stuff. But I'm telling you, it's easier for me if people ask particular questions so that I don't have to imagine what might be true about the people watching. I think that's pretty much, well, whatever. That's all I care to think about saying in the intro. I feel like I might have missed something, but I don't know what it is. Getting things done. We get this a lot. Like one of the most common things is I need to get better at getting stuff done. And now that I'm saying this, I'm wondering if I talked about this in a recent stream, but I don't know. And I guess it's not that worth thinking about unless somebody tells me I covered this already, which please do. If I'm saying something that I just recently said, tell me. I have so many conversations throughout the week. It's very hard for me to track who I said what to or on the stream or whatever. People will come in and say, I just need to get better at getting things done. I need to get more stuff done. I need to stop procrastinating, be more productive, some version of this, right? And it's something that we want to help with. And I'll tell you, it's something that causes our staff here more stress than anything else probably, is when people ask things like that. They'll get to a point, I will get to a point sometimes still, like, well, I don't know how to help you be more productive, because it's very complicated. It's not something that has cookie cutter answers as much as there are a bunch of different books that would like to pretend that there are cookie cutter answers. So we'll talk through it, and I want to be practical. Here's the first step that's practical, is we got to figure out what somebody means. If you are thinking you have to be more productive, you have to get better at getting stuff done, like the way that is phrased is a general statement, right? It means that I have observed problems in my life, more than one individual instance of problems, and I have connected those problems. I've linked them into some kind of pattern or narrative that to me all fits under the umbrella of, if I was better at getting stuff done, those problems wouldn't have been problems. So even though if somebody pointed it out like I'm about to do right now, of course I know there are other variables involved in each of those things besides just my ability to get stuff done or make myself do what I need to do, or whatever language people are using. I'm leaving out those variables because those don't allow me to make the big pattern, right? In fact, oftentimes people, maybe it's worth talking about, quote unquote, making excuses, just generally, but this comes up a lot in terms of, am I just making excuses? Is when we look at the specifics of a particular instance of something, and there's reasons other than just I'm not good enough at getting stuff done. There are other variables that impacted the fact that it wasn't accomplished. People will often then be, oh, that's just an excuse. I don't want to make excuses. It's really about me getting stuff done. There's a reason for that. Not just the messaging in our culture of, grind culture and work hard and whatever, although that's definitely problematic and definitely plays into this. But there's incentive to make any problem fit a larger pattern, because then I can solve it all in one fell swoop. If every bad thing that ever happens to me, if everything I ever experienced that I don't like and wish it was different, if I can explain all of those by saying, if I was just better at getting stuff done, well then, hey, I only need to learn one thing. I just need to learn how to be better at getting stuff done, and then I will never have problems again, which is obviously ridiculous, but that's how the brain works. We're trying to find the most efficient solution. So we want to group things together, but in order to do that, we have to leave information out. We can't look at all the specifics. And sometimes when that's what you're doing, if somebody points out to you or asks a question about some of the specifics in a particular instance, the response will be, I don't want to make excuses. That's an excuse. I could have done it, right? So what we can always say is that if you are thinking, I need to get better at getting stuff done, if you're thinking anything about, I just need this, or if this was different, it's your theory of how to solve a problem, right? It's not the problem itself. The problem isn't that you're not as good as you want to be at getting stuff done, or at least it's very unlikely that that's the problem. The problems are the specific things that have happened. And those can still be grouped up. I procrastinate is more specific than I need to get better at getting stuff done, while still being general. Or I always wait until the last minute and I get so stressed, and then I want to start earlier, but I never do. Or, we're getting more and more specific. But it's still a theory. It means I had this stressful experience. I missed this deadline. I wanted to do this thing and I didn't do it. Or I wanted to do this thing well and I did it and thought it was done well, but only found out later that if I had had more time or more whatever resources available, it could have been better. So now I'm saying, if I was better at starting earlier, getting things done, more productive, then I would solve that problem, or would have solved that problem, and therefore I think it'll solve the next one. And that's great. Theories are good. They're unavoidable for one. Like, when you experience something that you don't like, part of the definition of what it means to not like something is to think about another version of that thing that would be preferable, which means that you're thinking about what could be different. There might be things that happen to you that don't bother you at all, that I could make bother you if I could. It does not bother you that you can't fly just by willing your body to hover above the ground, right? But hypothetically, if you believed, accurately or not, doesn't matter, but if you believed that other people could, or even that pretty much everybody can except for you, then it would really bother you, right? So if something is bothering you, you have to be aware of the existence of a preferable alternative version of that thing, whatever that means, right? Even pain, it's, I don't want to be, I wish I wasn't in pain, right? Actually, that comes into play a lot with chronic pain and chronic fatigue syndromes and things like that, is what's your baseline, your base level. Anyway, theories are great. You have them. There's nothing you can do about that. So we want to use them. But the first thing that we want to do before getting into resolving whatever thing you've identified as the thing that's worth resolving, in this case, getting better at getting things done, is figure out what is the problem that it's connected to. At least one, but as much as possible. Because sometimes theories, especially theories like that, I need to get better at getting stuff done, are not actually tied to any specific observable experience. Sometimes it's just a general sense of, I think it would be better if I was more productive. And that's okay too, except that it is very likely that if that's the case, no matter how productive you become, by whatever definition you're using, you'll still feel as though you should be more productive. Because here is an unfortunate truth: you'll never be problem free. Hopefully, over time, your problems become less impactful, less painful, more manageable, less frequent, whatever, but they'll never be gone completely, right? So if your theory on every problem I ever have is because I don't work hard enough, well, then no matter how hard you work, you'll have another problem and you'll go right back to, oh, yeah, I'm still not working hard enough. It actually can become very difficult to track any change if that's the case. If all you're saying is this is a general theory of why my life is hard sometimes, then you could be actually becoming quite more productive or getting better at getting stuff done without even noticing it, because you're really only engaging with it as a concept that explains why sometimes your life sucks. And it does, by the way. None of this is to say, oh, your problems are in your head. Problems are real. They exist. I'm not trying to be toxic positivity and say like, no, you're fine. You're just making a mountain out of a molehill. Although sometimes we do that. I'm not saying that in a general way. We just want to pay attention to what's actually going on. So that's the first question: is what problem is this connected to? One way to ask that in a very like practical, concrete way for yourself is to say, here's a standard generic question. And it's not even mine. I got it. I mean, I've modified it a bit, but it's from some theory of therapy that I think it's from solution focused brief therapy. But is to say, okay, let's imagine that somebody else, not me, was watching it, was looking at two videos of me. And in one of those videos, I'm good at getting stuff done. And in one of those videos, I am not. How would they know which one is which? It's a way of forcing yourself to get clear on distinguishing what you're trying to go for from what is currently happening. Because if you have that clarity, you can start to measure some progress instead of just feeling like, yeah, still, I guess not enough, right? Like if your goal was, I want to be happier, then you might be getting happier every day. But the goal of I want to be happier isn't going to go, there's no level of maximal happiness, right? You're always going to be able to find ways that it could be more. So we want something to be able to aim at. And I'm not saying be realistic with your goals. I just mean get outside of your head and make sure that you understand what you're even trying to aim for. If you go to an archery range and you're shooting at a target, you have a target, right? So you can say, oh, I'm aiming for the bullseye, or you can aim for whatever you want, but you can look at something and say what you're aiming for, and then you can do something, see where the arrow ends up, and see how close or far it is from what you were aiming for. And then you can try something else and see, did that get closer or further away? And over time, as you make different attempts, you can look at patterns. Every time I exhale right before I release the string, it seems like it's closer or whatever, right? If you went to the archery range and you had the bow and the arrow, but there was just nothing down the range for you to aim at, and your goal was just to be a good shot, I want to be really accurate, but you have no target to look at to measure your accuracy, then you might be accurate, you might not be, you might be getting better. This attempt or that technique or that strategy might be better for you or worse, and you would have very little knowledge of any of that. It makes it very difficult. But we have a tendency to get into our heads because, again, larger pattern. Well, what's the largest pattern? What's the one thing I can say is definitely true of every negative experience I've ever had is I was involved. So we're incentivized to find the ways in which I am contributing to the problem. And there are definitely ways, right? Doesn't mean it's my fault. It doesn't mean I'm the primary reason, but I was there. So I must be doing something, noticing something, feeling, thinking something, interacting with the problem. And so I can always find that pattern. We're all going to want to be better. It's about getting more specific so that we can actually do things to make that happen instead of just thinking, yes, I solved the problem. If I was just better, then it wouldn't have happened. And sometimes being better at getting stuff done is that. So we want to ask that question, use that concrete example. How would I know? How would somebody else know? Sometimes you can ask yourself without putting it through somebody else. That's just useful to get people out of their own heads in terms of, well, because I'll feel productive, I'll be focused. What does that mean in real objective, like observable terms, right? But it's not always necessary. Sometimes you can say, no, I just want to be more relaxed. Cool. We still want to come up with some way to measure that, to say, okay, I want to be more relaxed. Here's the marker I'm going to be looking at to see whether or not I am, what level of relaxed I'm experiencing on a certain day. The amount of times I sweat in a day that aren't due to like being outside in hot weather will let me know how much I'm stressing. So I want to track that. And that's a particular example. They don't all need to be that like observable. It could just be things too, like I'm going to notice every time I feel like, ooh, I'm stressed, I'm going to make a mark. Like, oh, yep, I'm stressed, mark it down. Oh, I'm stressed, mark it down. It's not perfect, but it doesn't have to be specific and observable all the time. But we do want something to aim at. If you're attempting some task, you want to know the completion criteria of that task. If you're trying to write a book, then you got to know what would that mean in terms of whatever you're writing. What are you looking for in it that will tell you that it's done? Because you will never just feel like it's done. That'd be like feeling as though you can just never work on actually changing anything about yourself. Like, no, no matter what you change, something else will happen and you'll be like, ooh, it would be even better. Same thing with art, same thing with research papers, or really anything that you're worried about how other people might perceive it. You could always make more changes. So saying when I feel done is not really a completion criteria. One very common criteria for completion is when the due date hits. I'm going to be done at this point because I have to turn it in. I have to submit it to my editor. I have to, turn in the assignment in the class. And that leads to all kinds of things that people then get into procrastination and all that stuff. If that's your completion criteria, if you know that you're done because you're out of time, then it actually makes the most sense to start as late as possible while still giving yourself enough time to complete the task before the due date. Because if that's the only way you know you're done is the due date has hit and you start 2 weeks early, you're just working for 2 weeks. Whereas if you start the day before, you're working for a day. Either way, you complete the task, you finish it at the same time. If you're going to try and start early, the point of that is either to be able to iterate, do things over and over, multiple attempts. That is something you would want to start early for, which is something that's good to aim for, but you can only do it for one thing at a time. One thing gets your best. Everything else is what needs to happen, right? So if you're going to start early, it's either because you want to iterate and just keep improving. You want to be able to do it over and over and over until it's time to turn it in. Or you want to have some objective, observable criteria to say it is done other than the due date. If neither of those things are true, then what you should do, and what you probably already have been doing, is making your guess about when you must start by in order to have enough time and other resources to get it accomplished before it's due. And you're wrong about that all the time. We all are. That's another reason it's nice to start early, is to give yourself a buffer, because I think it'll take me 3 hours. Oh, crap. This is going to take me 6. If I only started 3 hours before, then I'm in trouble. So yeah, you want to give yourself a buffer, and you want to work on being more accurate about your predictions of what things are going to take you over time, so that when you start at the last minute, you're actually starting at the last minute instead of starting a little bit after the last minute. But otherwise, yeah, I got totally off on a particular tangent there, but that's a very common one, right? Anyway, so we want to know what we're actually talking about. That the theory is, if I was better at getting stuff done, those things would resolve themselves. Then we have something to measure. And then we can come up with theories on what to try and new strategies. In terms of how to develop those strategies, what ideas to come up with, there's all kinds of things. I would love some specific questions at this point, but I can talk in generalities again. Just remember that it's theory. Usually people are focused on their theories of what change would help resolve a problem more so than they are thinking about what the problem actually was. because there's not a lot of value generally. Like, we don't feel as though there's a lot of value, our brains don't feel as though there's a lot of value in just thinking about the problem. There's really no way to think about the problem without also thinking simultaneously about what caused it or what could happen to have solved it or solve it at this point. So we get onto those and then we get stuck there. We've talked about sticky answers before, right? This is a sticky answer. That's what that first step is for, is to just make sure that the idea that I need to get better at getting stuff done isn't a sticky answer that's actually blocking me from looking at something else more useful in regards to something. But if I'm able to define a specific, like, this is what I want to be doing. I want to be making more art. I want to be taking on more freelance gigs to make more money. Great. Like, that's something we can track. Then we get into this other stuff. And all right, I was hoping for something specific, but I'll just go more general frameworks. The next thing I would say, if we're talking generally, is what we call the accomplishment equation. Be aware, remind yourself, and look through. Everything has a value and a cost. And the value might be different to you than it is to other people. In fact, it is, it can't be exactly the same, but sometimes it's bigger variations and sometimes smaller. But the cost varies as well. One of the biggest problems here is that people get locked into this idea that capability is a binary, that it's static, that I am either capable of a thing or not capable of a thing. And if I've ever done a thing, then that would prove that I'm capable of doing the thing. And if I'm locked into the idea of capability as static and binary, well, binary means I did it once, so therefore I can do it. And static means I at all times and in all contexts can do it because it doesn't change. I'm ignoring the context. This is a ridiculous example, like many of my examples are, but I try to use things that like people can relate to and prove the point. Are you capable of eating a burrito? Probably. Most of you are probably saying yes. I'm sure there are some exceptions, but I would guess most people are capable of eating a burrito, like physically capable of it. Are you capable of eating a burrito just after you've eaten 6 other burritos? Probably not. In fact, you probably couldn't even eat the 6 to get there. Again, exceptions, but generally, right? Context matters. I'm capable of doing this work. I know the math. I'm capable of getting the answers correct. Cool. But context, the specific context of whatever thing, the homework you're working on, in the time of day, on the day, in the week, that you're working on it, with all the specific things that have happened in that day and the other things you did first and the other things you got to do next, and et cetera, might mean that you're not capable of it in this moment. So that's why we use cost instead of capability, because it's neither binary nor static. Meaning, what would it cost me to do this thing is a better question than, am I capable of doing this thing? Because technically, with some exceptions, obviously, especially for biological reasons, but generally, technically, with some exceptions, anything that a human can accomplish, any human can accomplish, because if nothing else, the second human could get the first human to do it for them, right? Theoretically. So if you're looking at it as a binary, I can or I cannot do that thing, well, neither of those positions is really like technically defensible if you really get into the details and specifics of it, which means if one person is saying you can and one person is saying you can't, they can argue forever because neither position can be proven. And that's oftentimes how we end up in that sticky answer version that we tried to get rid of in the beginning here of, is that an excuse? Or, am I capable of this? Is it fair to ask me to do this? Is it reasonable? Etc. You can do it. A lot of times defenses then become like, okay, sure, technically I'm physically capable of getting out of bed, but you don't understand, I am so depressed that I cannot get out of bed. And of course that is true when it's true, but that doesn't mean physically incapable. And in order to kind of defend it as physically incapable, some of us become very rigid about the idea of these things as physical, biological, and nothing else, which definitely isn't true. Doesn't mean that there isn't organic, biological, physical components, and maybe even the primary ones. But no matter how your brain is structured, no matter what your serotonin levels are, you are not experiencing the same level of depression, exactly the same depression all the time. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse, which means that there are variables that interact with it other than just the structure of your brain and body. Those things might feel random because they are in practice random, but random just means we can't predict it. It doesn't mean that there's no reason for it. It's not like somebody somewhere is rolling a dice to determine whether you're going to be depressed on a day or not. It just means we don't know what the variables are that play into it, right? So it's a lot of these binary fights are, there's flaws on both sides usually. Well, I don't know about usually, but oftentimes way more wrong with one side than the other, but neither is perfect, which lets both sides continue to pick at the other, because even though you got a lot more right, there's still technically these things that don't make sense, right? So we want to look at cost, not capability. What would it cost you? And what resources do you have available? Already, by using that language in the example we just gave of being so depressed you can't get out of bed for a day or 3 days or whatever, well, we can now distinguish at least two different possibilities. One is that for whatever contextual reasons, whatever is happening in the context, that the cost of getting out of bed has shot through the roof. It's much higher than it usually is. So while I usually can afford to do it, I can't afford to pay the cost right now because it's so much more expensive, maybe because of biological factors or maybe because of other things. Another would be that, no, getting out of bed actually costs about the same as it usually does, but my resources are so depleted that I can't afford to pay that cost, even though I usually can. I don't have it. By this way of looking at it, if something is impossible for you, if there's literally something that, if there's something that you cannot do, which of course, in any given moment, I could name, I don't know how many different things I literally cannot do. But what I'm saying is the cost for me to do those things is beyond my capability. Sometimes it's beyond all realistic, sometimes it's, the cost for me to accomplish this thing would be 400 years worth of work, and I can't do that because I won't live to be 400 and whatever years old, right? Go to space, okay. I can't go to space, except if I could afford to spend $20 million or however much it is, then I could, right? I got some questions, and like I always say, I'd rather answer questions. So I'm going to read them, and if they're off this topic, we'll be going on to this instead, but we'll see. Random question. Any thoughts on gifted kids actually being special needs kids? Yes, I do have thoughts on that. What I mean by that is, it seems all too common that kids who are told they were really smart and have so much potential and who do well in academics from a young age, often with minimal effort, at some point or another end up in a place where they feel burnt out, embarrassed, ashamed, etc., because of not living up to expectations, developing oversized ego. Do you have advice on how to set up a gifted child for success from the perspective of the parent? Yes, and I'll give you general stuff, but also feel free as we're going along to clarify. Know that these are public comments, so don't say anything you don't want to be public. But so we'll start here, and this is going to be not the easiest part of it, but I think it's the most important part to start with, which is the concept that giftedness, or the idea that the concept of giftedness is inherently flawed. What we're talking about is somebody is observably performing or behaving differently than the norm in some significant way based on whatever metrics and methods we have to measure that. In the particular case where we're calling someone gifted, what we're saying is we think those ways of being different from the norm are good ways to be different than the norm, particularly as related to academics or intelligence or whatever. But it is, I think, worth knowing, only because this is a shorthand. I don't think the little factoid I'm about to give, I don't think dictates anything about what an individual. I worked in gifted education and with gifted people for a long time. I know everybody's doing wonderful work. Nothing of that gets taken away by what I'm about to say. but I need to break the concept of it a little bit so that we can talk about what I think might really be going on. That the first time that the term gifted was used in reference to a person's intelligence was in a literal eugenicist text, not just an unrelated book written out by some person it turns out was a eugenicist, but the actual book in which he was saying we can divide people into 4 categories and only the top 2 categories should be allowed to procreate. And the second category was gifted. The first was preeminent. Of course, that's not talked about a lot. But at the root of it is this: intelligence, whatever you want to call it. And everybody has their different, including, the researchers, the designers of the IQ tests and all, they have different ways of talking about what intelligence is, because it's a construct. It's not an observable thing. It's something. Constructs are valid. They're useful. I'm not saying that means it's nothing and it's ridiculous. I'm just saying it's made up. Construct means we constructed it. What we're saying is we've observed some people perform in this way or behave in this way, and some people behave in this way, and we're looking at patterns and we're deriving correlations, and then we've invented the concept of intelligence as an explanation for why some people perform like this and some people perform like this. And then based on that, we can make predictions, right? Oh, okay, well, if somebody is intelligent, then we can also look at this other thing and this other thing and this other thing, blah, blah, blah. But it is not actually a thing. If you get a high IQ score on an IQ test, that means something, but it means that you do the things that are asked of you on an IQ test well under the conditions in which you took the test, as compared to other people that were used to norm the stats for the test under similar conditions, but not the same conditions. So what we're talking about are people who are observably different. And in this particular case, when we're talking about giftedness, we're talking about usually children, and who are different in the academic environment primarily, and in a way that we consider preferable. Well, what we generally consider preferable in terms of how someone performs in the academic environment usually comes down to 2 things. How much can they do independently, and how quickly can they do something? If you can do things on your own without referencing a text, you just remember all that stuff, you come up with that solution without talking to somebody about it. And if you can do things fast, that's how we tend to say, yep, those people are, including, by the way, back to the IQ test, you're doing that test, you're answering those questions without help from anyone else or the ability to reference any other texts. So it's about what you can do independently, and it's in a timed situation. So it's about how much you can do quickly. Well, what is often talked about, I think, and so I probably won't spend as much time talking about it unless you would like me to, please tell me. But what's often talked about is what that sets people up to expect, whether we're talking about mindset. Carol Dweck's book, Mindset, which I love, Fixed Mindset versus Growth Mindset, is a great construct. Nobody's really found any utility in translating that into what do we do then, but it's a nice explanation for some things that we observe. If what we're telling people is that they are valuable because they're smart, by which we primarily mean they can perform academic tasks set for them by other people independently and quickly, then they're looking at, I need to do things on my own and I need to do them fast. Both of those things are not actually generally good if we're talking about real problems, not academic problems, because academic problems have to have academic solutions. Academic meaning we've removed this information, this problem, from the context that makes it actually relevant to somebody's life. It's a good thing generally, right? Like that's why we do it. We don't want you to have to learn, we don't want pilots to have to learn about how to handle an engine failure when their engine fails for the first time. We want to give you that information and have you be able to practice in an environment where it's safe because the problem isn't real. The downside of that is that it's a very inefficient way to learn because you don't have the specific details of the experience, right? I'm telling you all the details that I think that we have come to a conclusion are relevant. So this is what you do when an engine fails. But there are elements there that we just cannot replicate. Even if we try very hard to describe them using language, that's not the same as what it actually feels like to be in that chair when that's happening. So it's not as efficient, but it's much safer. We've kind of lost track of that generally, but I'm getting off course there. If you are actually like, look at your life outside of school, right? With some exceptions, especially in certain career fields, any real problems that you need to resolve either is involving a lot of just things that must be done but not figured out. It's known how to do it. It just has to be done. And those tend to be pretty repetitive. You got to do the things over and over, modify for the specific details. Or if whatever you're doing involves having to come up with a new solution, it's much more efficient to do that in collaboration with other people by referencing the books or the podcasts or the whatever that other people have written, or by engaging with somebody who's there in the moment. But we've conditioned kids, especially gifted ones, but really all of them in our academic environment, to think that getting help is bad. That by the time that to ask for support, to express to someone that you don't have a solution or you don't have knowledge is a failure. We've incentivized people to try to do it on their own first. And we all have a threshold at which we will stop trying to do it on our own. But what we do after that changes, depending on a lot of different things. Meaning we've set people up so that they have to struggle. First, I attempt a solution. Most of the time that works, great, we're done. But if it doesn't, now it's a problem and I'm noticing it, and I might try some other solutions, or I might think of other solutions that I don't actually enact or whatever, but it's not working. At a certain point, then I can say, okay, I'm just going to go ask for help. So yeah, they feel burnt out, embarrassed, ashamed, in part because, as many people discuss, what they're aiming for isn't really possible. And so they will inevitably fail at it and then feel bad because they don't think that it's inevitable. They think that it's possible, they just didn't do it right. So we want to clarify that. What are people actually going for, trying to do? What do they think is realistic, right? That's part of actually in the what we were talking about before, the productivity stuff at the beginning. That's part of it. Sometimes people are working 7 hours a day and saying, why am I only working 7 hours a day when everybody else works 8 hours a day? Except that observation, both anecdotal but also actual research, tells us that people do not work 8 hours a day. They work on average 2.5 hours a day. So if you're working 7, you're already doing much more than most people, because the brain and the body are not designed to actually work productively for 8 hours a day, at least, especially in regards to like knowledge work, information work. But because you have an idea that you're supposed to do something even more than that. So another reason that this can happen with gifted kids in particular is because we all have ideas that, I should never experience pain. I should always help people and never harm anyone. There are some universal things that we start with that we will inevitably fail at, but some people can go longer without failing at some of those things for the first time, or longer in between failures. So they identify the failure not as inevitable, but as a particular specific mistake. So we want to look at what we're aiming at for sure with gifted kids. And I think that's really important for parents. One of the other things that can be really problematic as a parent for of a gifted child. Oh, let me answer your first question. Gifted kids actually being special needs kids. Yes, I tried to address that by saying that they are different from the norm, which would, by literal definition, mean that they have special needs in terms of they respond to things in different ways than the norm. Of course, everybody's different than the norm in certain ways, but these are significant differences as measured, blah, blah, blah. As far as like how do we allocate funding in schools, then that's getting a lot more complex, because there are a lot more variables than just would these children benefit from specialized learning environments or specialized tasks. Of course they would, but that's also true of literally everybody. So how do we allocate limited resources is a tricky conversation, and it's unfortunate that it's one that we have to have, but we do. We have finite resources. In the meantime, let's advocate for better and better and better. But would they do better? Absolutely. If we're saying how bad does it need to be in order to say they must have special, well, then we're back to how bad does it need to be before you're allowed to have help. Part of what's a struggle for gifted kids and parents is nobody wants to take your struggles seriously. Oh, boo-hoo, I'm so smart. Oh, so hard, I get bored. Like, that's a response that you get a lot. And of course, that leaves out all kinds of stuff primarily that we're all people, and people have very real and valid struggles and pain, regardless of whatever advantages they might have too, right? You can be intelligent and still have problems. And intelligence is not a thing, or at least the way that we talk about it. I don't know if that's worth getting into now. So, as a parent, to help them set up for success, well, one thing that's worth talking about is, what do we mean success? Do we mean success in academics? Do we mean success in terms of how happy and fulfilled they feel? Success financially in the occupational field eventually someday? We got to be clear about that, because different answers in terms of the specifics. But we want to have those conversations. We want to know what we're aiming for. If you feel bad, if you feel burnt out, embarrassed, ashamed, etc., because of something that you're doing, right, that you think is not good enough or whatever, it means that you are perceiving what you're doing, and you are aware or believe that there's a different way to do whatever you're doing that would be in some way preferable. And the larger the gap between those things, the more distress you're feeling. So sometimes that's about, yes, we want to change what you're doing to come closer to what you want, what would be preferable. Sometimes it's looking over here and saying, is what you think is preferable even possible? Or to what extent, or what would it cost you again? And maybe we want to bring this closer, or both, or whatever. But we talk through that, because what I can say generally about gifted kids is that they are language oriented. There are so many, I would guess, I don't know this specifically, but I would guess that there are far more language processing issues among gifted kids than non-gifted peers. And God, I hate that term. It's the term that people use. We got to use the language that exists. But by the way, that's part of the reason that people don't take your struggles seriously, is because the word that we use to describe it is not a neutral term. It's not, it is saying it's a gift. It is a good thing to have, and therefore a bad thing not to have. So when you then talk about the struggles, it's a pretty natural reaction for people to say, okay, so you have this cool thing that I don't have, and you're better than me, but now you want me to feel bad for you, right? And of course, that's not what it is. The language. Yeah, not living up to expectations. That's the part everybody talks about. And I talked about it for probably longer than is, I don't know. Lots of people talk about that stuff. I would focus in on how to avoid those feelings of burnout. Oh, in terms of success, avoid those feelings of burnout, embarrassment, shame, and help them become well-adjusted as adults. Some of that is specific. Avoid feelings of burnout, embarrassment, and shame. We can measure that to some extent, right? What exactly counts as those things? We're all going to have different definitions, but I can say I'm feeling embarrassed or not. So that's still something I can observe. Become well-adjusted, that we're back into success, right? Like, we want to have conversations about what that means. Anyway, typically for gifted kids, they're language oriented, which means talking through things is very helpful. Sensitivities. So if I don't know if you have experience in like the gifted realm, with gifted experts and whatever, but one model that's talked about a lot in that world is Dabrowski's overexcitabilities. Oh, I like that. What about gifted and talented parents, adults? I'll incorporate that too. Dabrowski's overexcitabilities. One of the things that's often discussed as the problem with being gifted is that they experience things more intensely, and emotions are more intense, sensations are more intense, everything's more intense, which again I think is a terrible way of talking about it, because how are we defining that? What the hell does that mean? But it matches with, they have big emotional reactions to things that I don't think warrant that, right? Or that most people don't think warrant that big emotional reaction. Or they respond as though they are in pain to sensory stimuli that other people don't seem to be caused pain by, right? So it's another construct, a theory to help explain that. But here's what I like to talk about in terms of sensitivities, which are rampant in gifted kids, but they're rampant everywhere. We're talking about attentional processes. Attention awareness is finite. You only notice so much, and the processes that dictate what things you notice and what you don't are outside of conscious control. We know some things that seem to be universal, right? They're modified specifically for each unique individual, but universally, we will notice things that seem to cause us danger, right? If something might kill you, your brain, your attentional processes are going to prioritize that. You might be accurate or inaccurate about whether it's actually dangerous, but if your brain is perceiving that it is dangerous or potentially dangerous, high priority to notice. That we prioritize noticing negative things over positive things as an extension of that prior point. Even if this might not kill me, anything that's bad, negative in some way must be able to be defined as making it more likely that I will be harmed or die or drained and therefore less able to prevent blah, 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 something bad. We prioritize that stuff. So there's some universal, and then there's all kinds of unique and individual. Sensitivities, I think the most useful way I've found to talk about sensitivities is your brain seems to prioritize in terms of attention some category of data. Let's use auditory sensitivity as an example. Your brain seems to prioritize auditory data disproportionate to the utility of that data, as best we can tell. And yeah, it's an exact thing. Meaning, when a fire alarm goes off, all of us, because of the way the fire alarm is designed by nature, all of us who can hear are going to have a moment, a split second of, oh God, we're not expecting that. It intrudes in on our conscious awareness. The attentional processes are saying, what the hell is this? Let's think about it consciously and figure it out. And then we figure it out pretty quickly, usually. Oh, that's the fire alarm. And then we start thinking, not what is that, but what do I do now? Where am I supposed to go? Or what has to happen? I'm still aware of the fire alarm. I'm not noticing it at all, but fewer of my resources are being spent on the fire alarm sound because I am demonstrably, observably for myself thinking about other things, which means that's taking resources away from that. Some people, it seems, is based on their reaction and the way that they describe the experience, that initial moment of, oh God, continues, doesn't stop. So what is the utility of noticing the fire alarm? Why does it blare the way that it does? Because we are wanting to make sure that everybody knows that there's a potentially dangerous situation that they might not be aware of by any other means besides the fire alarm. But as soon as you hear that fire alarm and are aware that there's a potentially dangerous situation, at that point, the only utility in continuing to notice the fire alarm is to notice whether it's continuing or whether it's stopped. Continuing to pay attention to the specific details of exactly how loud and blaring and sharp it is doesn't do anything for you, and in fact gets in the way, as we see with people who then, get to a place where they're kind of overwhelmed and shut down. But that sensitivity, it's unlikely only has problematic impact, like getting, overwhelmed and shutting down or experiencing pain from noises. Why would the brain not prioritize auditory data in other situations if we have established that as a pattern? So that means that in some cases, you're probably getting a lot of extra data compared to other people. In our example, from some noise that you're hearing, you're hearing levels of detail and distinction that other people are not. If you know what to do with that, if you have frameworks and you're able to utilize that information, that can make you better suited to doing something that involves that type of data than other people. I used to talk about it, I call it the bathtub analogy. If you imagine a bathtub has three important relevant parts for this metaphor. There's the faucet that brings water in, there's the tub that holds water, and there's the drain that takes water away, right? So if we're thinking of data, water is the data. The bathtub is working memory, awareness, right? How much you can hold without starting to lose things. The drain is processing, and the faucet is perception. So people, when their bathtub is overflowing in this metaphor, when I'm getting overwhelmed by sound, we tend to look for a deficit. And we say, oh, your drain must not be working well. You must be processing poorly. That's why you're getting overfull. Or, oh, your tub must be smaller than usual, so therefore you get overwhelmed much more quickly than other people. But here's another possibility, is that both of those things are working just as they work for other people, but your faucet is actually a fire hose. And instead of 1 gallon per minute coming in, I have no idea what an appropriate water flow rate is, but you've got 100. So you get overwhelmed quickly, even though your bathtub and your drain are roughly the same as other people's. I'm not saying that's the explanation either. All of this is a construct. I'm saying that we can look at it in different ways. So what we want to do is lean into what we're well suited for. What we tend to do in our culture, especially, what we tend to do is try to shore up our greatest weaknesses, because what do we care about? Being able to do things independently, being able to do things quickly. Well, if I'm failing at those things, then there's something that I don't know how to do. Either there's information, knowledge I don't have about how to do it, or there's some physical element of skill involved that I just can't control my body quite the right way I need to in order to get it done. That's a problem, negative. So I notice it. I'm looking at, I need to be able to do it independently. If somebody suggests to me, oh yeah, that's easy to navigate, just get somebody who can do it to do it for you, then I'm going to say, no, that's not what I'm talking about. I need to be able to do it, right? So we're focused on ourselves as where we are, where we have deficits, and we want to address those things. But again, really inefficient, and not how humans are designed, not the way that our brains and bodies were evolved. We're evolved to be communal, to be specialists. I handle this while you handle that. So the idea that you're supposed to be able to do everything independently, this hyper individualism, is terrible, terrible for many reasons. And especially for people who are praised from a young age for being able to do so much independently, right? Then when somehow later you can't, it's like, oh God, what did I do wrong? I usually can do this. I forgot why I was saying that. I got to backtrack my thoughts. We're talking about sensitivity. Oh, yeah, efficiency. So in terms of setting them up, yeah, we want to talk about, like everybody does, realistic expectations and things like that. That is important. And beyond that, because then you'll, hi, Rex and Miles. That's my wife, Susan, there, and Rex and Miles are two of my boys. Hi, buddies. Totally distracted because now I'm thinking of my amazing children who are very amazing. Oh, yeah, we want to look at what you're aiming for, but also sometimes you're going to get the feedback from people of, okay, great, you're telling me that I shouldn't feel bad about how I am, except you're ignoring the fact that there's actual real problems in my life. You're telling me to just feel better, but there's actual bad stuff happening. So we want to address that too. And we want to be able to get practical. And as a generic thing, a lot of what we can do for that is lean into strengths, not try to shore up weaknesses. Sometimes there are things that we do want to make sure I can do this independently because I can never rely on that somebody else is going to be there all the time, right? Like we were working on having our oldest son memorize our phone numbers, even though we don't do that anymore. He doesn't have a phone, right? So we want him to be able to access that knowledge independently, even though it's never been an issue thus far in his life and hopefully never will be. We want him to be able to access it independently. So sometimes we want to be able to say, no, in a worst case scenario where I have nothing but myself, I still want to be able to do this. Cool. But if it's not that, then you got to come up with some other reason that it's worth trying to get one of your weaknesses to be stronger. And strength and weakness, by the way, I don't even like those terms because they're inherently comparative, and that's not the point. But, we don't have time to get into the specific meaning of every piece of language we use. So we want, rather than encouraging people to be well-rounded, which is well-suited for people being independent, what is actually most efficient is for people to be specialized. And look at, literally pick anybody that you think of as having accomplished great things or that you think of as very successful. And if you look closely enough, you'll see that they're very specialized. They rely on a lot of other people to handle a lot of other things because there isn't a way to accomplish big, great things by yourself. Letting it go, being able to do everything yourself and accepting where you're at with a weakness sounds really humbling, but sounds like you can kind of unlock yourself in your time to do more of something you're actually good at. Yeah, especially when those things that you're focused on are impossible things. Like, I will never lose track of something that I was supposed to do. That's not possible. You're going to do it. You're going to lose track sometimes. But if that's what you're aiming for, every time you fail, it's kind of like if you're rigid in terms of resilience. I hate the concept of resilience because it conveys mostly to people this idea that you should continue to do something hard and uncomfortable and painful that doesn't appear to be paying off to you, with the thought that at some point it will pay off. But the problem is that sometimes that stuff pays off and sometimes it doesn't. So I want to be able to evaluate, is this painful thing I'm doing likely to pay off for me or not? Not just default to, oh, if you're giving up, that's bad in all cases. I don't want to waste, like you're saying, I don't want to waste my time, my energy, my resources on if if I am great at talking, right, which I am, and terrible at doing, maintaining things that need to be repeated day to day, which I am, but I want to run a business, and a business like this that involves both, well, I want to structure it so that I'm doing the talking as much as possible and somebody else is doing the stuff that needs to be done day to day the same. Then I want that person to be really well suited for that and probably not as well suited for the talking, because these things are trade-offs. That's part of the issue with the idea of giftedness and privilege, by the way, which is a very important concept, but is usually talked about as an unearned advantage. And while I agree, I see that definition, it's not a particularly useful one, because those are debatable terms. What is an advantage and what is earned? Oh, you have privilege, you just inherited your dad's company. You have no idea what I had to do in order to be the one that my dad left the company to, right? Like, people still do things. And I'm not saying that's a good counter argument. I'm saying I don't want to define it in a way that's arguable. But if we do it in this comparative sense, this idea that some people are just globally better in some way than other people, which is a huge part of the problem with our concept of intelligence in this culture, because our concept of intelligence is globally advantageous. In all time, in all contexts, at all times, it is always better to be more intelligent than less intelligent. That cannot be true. It can't be. If it was, we wouldn't evolve to have varied intelligence spread across our population the way that we are, and except in cases of pathology. We don't vary that some people have no eyes, some people have one, some people have two, three, four, five, six. There's injury and illness, obviously, where things go differently than typical or than expected or whatever. But outside of those cases, we all have two eyes. So if there was anything, intelligence or anything else that was actually beneficial globally all the time, it wouldn't vary. So that's part of the problem here, is if people are feeling privileged, which is a good thing to be aware of and reckon with, but they define it as an unearned advantage, in this case, intelligence. I'm smart. That puts a burden on me. I've got more than other people got. So I have to do more than other people do. And then at that point, what am I supposed to be referencing that tells me when I've done enough? Whereas if we accept that, no, I like to think of it, I find it useful to say we have the exact same resources, but again, it's a construct. It doesn't matter. We could say some people have larger working memories and some have smaller, like most, our structures talk about it that way. I prefer to talk about it as our working memory is all the same, but different types of data take up different amounts of space in my working memory. And so same is true for you and whatever. So if you can hold more numbers in your head than I can, it's not because your working memory is larger, it's because you're more efficient at that kind of data. Everything has trade-offs, just purely from a survival point of view, right? An evolutionary point of view. Cost. Even things like binocular vision that are apparently globally beneficial as compared to the alternatives, there's a cost to that. It's just that in this case, biology and the process of evolution has determined apparently that it is always worth paying that cost, except in cases of injury or illness. Hard question in general setting. Suggestions for sifting through options and finding strengths to focus on. Yes. Ooh, good. Okay. Interest, impulse, desire, enjoyment. We have no better metric to measure somebody's ability to engage with something efficiently and with facility as compared to other people than what they enjoy. You've probably heard a lot of stuff about the most optimal and efficient learning happens through play, things like that, right? Because that's what we're talking about. And I'm not trying to be like woo woo, let's hold hands and sing kumbaya, although I hope we all are nice to ourselves and each other. I think that's good, but I'm not talking about that right now. I'm talking about the practicality of what happens. I'm talking about schema. If I know a thing, I have language for that thing, right? I have schema, a collection of knowledge about that thing. derived somewhat through experience, somewhat through communication with other people or whatever. The larger my schema for that thing is, the more language I have for that thing, the more I can get into the fine details and nuance of that thing. There's a reason that it is inherently enjoyable, that we inherently prefer to engage with things that we know. When you listen to music, you probably listen mostly to music that you've already heard before. When you don't, it's probably because you've made a conscious decision to look at some new music, right? But there is a thing, a thought in this culture especially, that doing what you like to do is inherently bad. And particularly that kids doing what they like to do is inherently bad. It is not. Why would people's brains and bodies like a thing if it was inherently bad? It is possible, in fact, it is at least sometimes definitely true, that there are things we're incentivized for, say sugar or fat, right? Because it's advantageous to a certain extent and was rare in the conditions under which our bodies and brains evolved. So we had to be very incentivized to seek it out. And now the context has changed and we can overindulge, and having too much of something can be detrimental to us in some way, right? So there's some reason to think, oh, somebody liking something and doing too much of something is bad. But that's not because it's bad to like a thing. Kids like screens. Yeah, they do. They tend to, at least. Not everybody. Oh, no, that's terrible. But why? Somebody give me some reason, because I've read the research and we don't have it. There is no, in fact, all the research that we have pretty much shows that it's actually beneficial in some ways, because of course it is. Otherwise, why would they be drawn to it? Sense of control, right? Very simple and interactive and intuitive. A baby, my 9-month-old son likes to, on my smartwatch, swipe back and forth, because he gets to see that when he moves his finger, which he is doing deliberately, it affects the environment. The data that is conveyed, right? If I'm listening to something, there's auditory data. If I'm watching a show, there's auditory data and visual data. If I'm playing a game, there's auditory data and visual data and tactile data. It's also a safe environment if I'm playing a game where I am posed a problem that I don't know how to solve, try different things, experiment with different potential solutions, none of which actually cause me any real harm in the real world, even if my character dies or whatever. And then I can try another thing. The cycle is very fast of coming up with an idea, enacting the idea, and then observing the results of that idea. Anyway, I could say a lot, because we do, especially in this culture. Well, I say especially in this culture. What I mean is I don't know other cultures well enough to say that this is a universal thing. I just know it's true in our culture. That's usually what I mean when I say especially in our culture. We do have this thing that is very difficult to overcome, that doing something I like is bad. Here's an experiment. Define productivity or productive for yourself in some observable terms. And generally, I haven't encountered anybody that I've asked that question to who's been able to define it in some way that isn't either tautological, meaning you're using some element of the definition of productivity to define productivity itself, or eventually comes down to doing things that you don't want to do. We put inherent value on doing things that you don't like, which means by comparison, we put inherent, what's the opposite of value? I don't know, lack of value on things that you do like. But that's your strength. We don't have to run you through an assessment. You have an interest. I like playing D&D. I liked playing D&D when I was a kid. I started playing when I was 10, 11, 12, something like that. I don't remember. Been playing a long time. Now I am in the process of developing and launching a therapy group centered in large part around playing a game of Dungeons and Dragons on a weekly basis. And there's a lot of cool things about it that are unique and allow. Did I play D&D because I thought someday I would be able to develop something that I thought would be uniquely helpful? Of course not. I did it because I was interested in it. But because I was interested in it, I could engage with it a lot and get a lot of data about it. And then when I'm presented with problems later on, I have access to all that data that I can draw on. So one of my rules is people tend to focus on, I got to do what I'm supposed to do unless I can justify doing what I want to do, especially gifted kids and problematic concept and blah, blah, blah. But I'm trying to drive the point home. We got to wrap up. People are obsessed with this idea that I got to do what I'm supposed to do, meaning what other people do or what I think other people do or what other people think I should do or say I should do or what I think they think I should do, And to do what I want, I have to justify it. So we jump through these hoops to intellectually justify the fact that I just don't like a thing. I don't like that thing because blah, blah. You don't need it because you don't like it, unless there's a reason, right? So I like to flip the burden of proof. Do whatever your impulse is. Do whatever you most want to do, most enjoy, unless there's a reason not to. And that's not rare. At any given time, there's all kinds of things that I would like to be doing that there's reasons not to do. If nothing else, physical location. I want to swim while I'm not at a pool, right? It's not about making it less common. It's about moving the burden of intellectually justifying something from having to justify why you think what you think, why you feel what you feel, why you want what you want, onto why now is not the right time to do that. Or this is not the context in which to engage with that. Or I have to do this other thing instead. Because I mentioned earlier in this thing, you get one thing at a time that gets your best because you have finite resources. So you're splitting those resources among everything you're trying to do, including things that your body is doing without your conscious intention, breathing and digesting food and whatever. All of your finite resources are split among all that stuff. But we just said specialization is optimal, but there's limits to how far you can specialize, because we do have the only thing we know and can say about everything I'll ever experience is that I am there experiencing it. So there are some things we want to prepare for, but to the extent we can, we want to specialize. I played a lot of video games when I was young. You better believe, I don't know why I'm using that phrase. You better believe that knowledge, that experience, that information is relevant to what I'm doing. Aside from the fact that when I meet with clients, I have language to engage and discuss with them in that way, that I think in a certain way, I act in a certain way that is impacted by those things. I have a tendency to break things down into categories in the way that makes sense to me in games. Better believe it. So why do I have to justify it in advance? My justification is I enjoy it and I don't need to be doing something else right now. So I'm going to do this. I want to do it. Later on, I'll find out if I'm going to use that experience or not, but we can never really know. So yes, weird, hard question in a general setting, but yeah. As a parent, then you're struck with the tension between, okay, they can't know if they're going to enjoy something unless they're exposed to it. And we have a tendency to want to continue to engage with the things that we already know and enjoy, right? The music. They're going to want to listen to the same songs over and over. But how would they know that they'll like a song unless I sometimes encourage them or incentivize them or make them listen to new songs? So yeah, you want to expose people to things, and you want to be aware and listen to your kids about what they like and don't like. Because if you go with that quitting thing, right? If I go to my child and say, hey, you want to take piano lessons? Are you interested? How would they know? They've never done it before, but I can make it sound appealing, or I can make them do it or whatever. Okay, fine, I'll do it. But if they do it then and they hate it, and I say, well, too bad, you committed to it, you got to keep doing it. Fine, I can make them do it. It's going to be contentious. It's not going to make them like it more. It's going to make them hate it, and it's going to make them upset with me and me upset with them, and it's just going to be awful. And then the next time I say, hey, want to try this new thing, instead of saying, sure, they're going to have to think, am I going to like this or not? Without having the experience of it, they have to intellectually justify, will I like this thing or not? Which is inefficient and terrible, because you see that play out in your own life or in your kids' lives, where you think and you think and you think before trying anything. You got to think and think and think. You got to know, I got to really know what's the best college for me before I go somewhere. I got to really know what thing I'm going to enjoy the most off of this menu before I order something. You encourage them to try it, then you talk with them as it's going on, and then you quit. You let them quit when they want to quit, or step it back when they want to step it back, and if they get into it and they want to quit and they quit, and then a month later they want to get back into it, you do. Except that sometimes you can't because there's resources involved, right? So you have to deal with the reality of it. but that's optimal. Expose them to the things that you think they will like. You don't need to justify it. I think you'll like this. You probably will be able to justify it. I think you'll like it because blah, blah, blah. Doesn't matter. And in fact, as a parent, one of the most liberating things that I can say is you can want to expose your kids to things just because you like them. That's okay. It's not bad. It's only bad if you force them to continue to engage with those things, even though they don't want to, just because you like them. And even then, sometimes it's still worth doing. It's fine to say, I want you to see Star Wars because I like Star Wars. And if they like it, great. And if they don't, because also, by the way, they're shaped by you, both genetically and interactive, like in terms of their environment and experiences, is largely dictated by you. So it's quite likely that they have things in common with you, right? Just generally, a lot of the stuff you're talking about, and I would like to get more specific into like giftedness and intelligence and all that kind of stuff, but we don't have time today. Come back next week and ask me more questions. I'd love to get more specific on it. But all of this stuff generally falls into the category of people are aiming for things that they've been told they should be aiming for, not things that they have personally experienced and enjoyed. And that's not a bad thing inherently. I don't want my kids to have to fall off of a cliff to learn to be careful around cliffs. I want, as a parent, to insert myself and say, hey, that's dangerous. Sometimes I don't have the time and the energy to give reasoning, which is another general thing. You got gifted kids, give them your reasoning, not just your conclusions, not just don't play by the cliff. But if you play around by the cliff and you might fall off, then it's really bad. But we can't always do that. So sometimes it is just, if you play by the cliff, I'll be mad. And that's okay too, because you can't talk through everything. I'll say this last thing. I know I'm past time, but obviously I didn't have a 1:00 session today. So I'll say this last thing. I don't know if Susan's still here, but we had talked about this the other day, that there's a lot of like parenting advice out there these days of if your kids try to impact you negatively, right? They try to make you feel bad or make you annoyed or make you sad or whatever. Don't. If they say you're the worst, then instead of being like, no, you're the worst, go to your room, which obviously I don't like that either. You should say, wow, you're really having some big feelings. Something's really upsetting you. And that's great because you're paying attention to the function of the communication rather than the meaning. They don't actually mean that you're the worst. They're just trying to convey to you that they're upset with you. And they're doing that by trying to make you feel bad. But for me, if my kid said that to me, I would feel bad. Not because I think that they literally think that I'm the worst, but because they're doing something that seems to have the express purpose and intent of making me feel bad. That makes me feel bad. And rather than treat them like they have no impact on other people, no matter what you say, no matter how mean you are to me, you can't make me feel bad. I'm calm and rational no matter what. Which is, I think, also a terrible message. It teaches them that they don't impact anybody. It makes them feel shame. You ever been in an argument with somebody and you're getting heated and they stay calm and they're just talking in this tone of voice? Don't you feel like they're trying to make you feel like you're a jerk? Like they're weaponizing their ability to stay calm? No, I want them to know that they impact me. They've never said anything like that to me, but if they did, I would say, wow, that hurts. I don't think that you think I'm the worst, but I do think that you want me to feel bad. So I don't like that you want me to feel bad, that you're doing something to try and make me feel bad. That does make me feel bad. And I'm not mad at you or going to yell at you or whatever, but yeah, I am concerned about whatever thing is going on with you, whatever you're feeling that made you want to hurt me. And I want to help with that, but I am also hurt. We had a friend at one point who had a young, we're talking like a year old or something, couldn't move some, but still in diapers, who kept kicking her whenever she was trying to change the diaper. And she asked us, Susan and I, Susan is a brilliant parent and person and educator. And, she asked us, what would we do or whatever. And mostly we just said, if they kick me and it hurts, I'll say, ow, and I'll leave because I don't want to be around people that kick me and hurt me. Not to teach them a lesson, not to punish them, but because that's that's what happens when you hurt someone, is they're hurt. If I try to hide the fact that they hurt me, then how will they know that kicking is something I don't like? I'm supposed to just do it intellectually. Kicking is bad. You're breaking a rule, some idea of a thing, as opposed to the reality of, ow, that hurts. Or I'm even crying because of how much it hurt. Your kids don't want to hurt you. Or if they do, there are other issues going on, likely a lot of them about what you're doing to them. But no, your kids don't, people don't want to hurt other people just as a baseline. Usually we either want to help other people, make them happy, make them like us, or we just ignore them. We don't usually want to go out of our way to hurt somebody for no reason. And when we do want to hurt somebody else, it's usually because we think that will do something good for us or for other people. And it's worth hurting them. It's justified to hurt them, whatever. It's not an intrinsic thing. If your kid is hurting you, it's likely that they don't know how they're hurting you. They either don't know they're hurting you at all, or they don't know what specific thing they're doing that is causing you pain, or they don't. So you just talk to them about it. Another thing that can be really great, I keep saying the last thing and then I'll go, but it's fun talking about this and Susan's here, so it's more fun for me. And now I totally forgot what that last thing I was going to say is, so maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's a sign that we should wrap up here. Hurt me. I don't remember. Of course, I thought about 3 other things I wanted to say, but I'll leave it. We should wrap up. I'll be here next week, same time, Wednesday, 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. Central Time. Thank you for being here. I really, really do appreciate having actual questions. I don't like doing it on my own. I do it anyway because I want it. I think it's helpful to people who see it, whoever's here or might watch it later. But also I like the consistency that people know that they can show up here at a certain time, Wednesdays 1 to 2, and I'll be here. Even if no one's here, I'm doing it so that people know it's there. But it is a lot more fun for me and more effective, I think, by Susan, to get specific questions. So thank you. I appreciate that. And I hope you come back next week or the week after, or as much as you can and would like to. Yeah, I have a million other things I want to say, but I just have to stop. Thank you. Thank you for being here. I'll be here next week. Goodbye.